You're listening to the Missionary Perspective Podcast with veteran missionaries Erik Johnson and Joshua Mead. We're glad you could join us. We trust this podcast will be both a blessing and a challenge as we relate topics in world evangelism from a missionary perspective. Now, here's Josh and Erik. Welcome to the Missionary Perspective Podcast. We are glad you are here with us today. And I'm a little stressed out, Erik. No, stressed out because we have to talk about stress today. And so I'm thinking about all the times in the past when things just went wrong and everything on the mission field and all the stresses you experience. Sometimes you want to just forget those things. But I was thinking about it as we're going through these different podcasts, talking about stress, specifically pertaining to the mission field. I really feel being a missionary overseas, living in a foreign country, you have to have equal parts intensity and laid back. How do you say that? Laid backedness, and you have to be just as laid back as you are.
Gotta be chill. You gotta be chill.
Yeah. You have to be just as laid back, I think, as you are intense about things. What do you think about that? Does that kind of summarize how you approach the stresses of the mission field?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I want to pass on to the viewers/listeners is that you've heard many wise pastors say, don't pray for patience. Well, I'm going to tell future podcasters, don't do episodes on stress, because that's when all the stress is going to come. So absolutely. Now, as I mentioned in my podcast, it's not like Josh and I are talking about when we talk about stress here on the mission field, like we feel like, we have more stress than the average listener. We understand, but it is a unique kind of stress. And that's kind of some of the things we're going to talk about, because if you have lived in your home country for a while, there are different kinds of stresses that come up. And then I think that's even something funny, maybe we'll talk at the end, Josh, is that when you're away from stresses that you were used to in your old culture, and then you come back on furlough, you almost kind of laugh at the things people are stressing out over, like, this ain't nothing. But I think that has just completely to do with the culture you're in. But you have to be flexible. That's really the word that missionaries often will tell young missionaries. You got to be flexible. If you're too uptight, you're going to explode and it's not going to last. And you're going to really wear yourself out to a frazzle. Don't you feel like that way, Josh?
No, it's true. You have to learn to know how to biblically deal with the stress.
Yourself.
That's the key, isn't it? That's something that there's probably biblical principles you'll find in there, to be able to laugh at yourself. But that was one of the things they taught at candidate school. And that's one of the things that many of our directors would try to make an emphasis on, that of being able to laugh at yourself. And I've met a lot of very serious men on the mission field who don't know how to be, I think, what is the word? Self-deprecating, to be able to kind of mock yourself, put yourself down, laugh at yourself, but not in a way that's, a depressing sort of despairing type way.
Realistic.
Exactly. And so if you can't have fun, if you can't laugh at yourself, at all the crazy things that you're going to experience and you're going to do, if you can't, and I'll say this as well, if you can't handle being embarrassed in public, don't be a missionary. Just don't do it. Because especially when you go through language, you're like going back to being a kid again. You're going back to being
a big kid.
Yeah, you're gonna get embarrassed. And I've met missionaries and kind of observed how, man, they do something and they get embarrassed, and it's the end of the world, And so, you have to be able to laugh at yourself. You have to be able to be relaxed. You have to be able to not get offended and upset when you do something embarrassing in public, because it's going to happen a lot. I guarantee it.
Yes. Well, I was thinking so much of that also depends on your family dynamic. There's a artist I like, he sings a song talking about teenagers. And as your kids get older, they really help put you in your place and help you laugh at yourself. And certainly not in a mocking way, but I'm thankful I have a teenager and one almost a teenager, and they're really good at maybe showing me sometimes my ridiculousness and helping me realize, I shouldn't take myself so seriously. And so, you need to work on that family dynamic. You need to be able to laugh at yourself. Laugh at others, but not like Josh says, not in a mocking way, but be able to just kind of enjoy the funny side of life. Because if you can't, boy, it's going to be a tough haul on the mission field. And laughter is literally the best medicine.
No, you're right. Your kids need to see you laugh. They need to hear you laughing. You're talking about teenagers. Man, my 5-year-old, he came in last night and he's like, Dad, feel my muscles. I felt, he was like, oh, look, I'm real strong. I said, hey, he said, let me feel your muscles. So I'm like, oh, here you go. He felt my arm and said, I don't feel anything, Dad. I see you little stinker. So
he's learning early.
He is learning early. So yeah. So now we talked a couple weeks back. We shared, both of us shared personal stories of some key moments, some big moments of stress in our life, how the Lord helped us see those things through. There's a lot more that we can share. And like Erik said already, what we're sharing is we don't feel like as missionaries we're going through more stress than others, but it's a unique experience for sure that unless you've lived overseas, you can't fully comprehend the stress. And we've already said it, you're processing living in a foreign country, another language, a different culture. And so you're sometimes going through the same stress, but you're experiencing it through a whole nother world view and a whole nother world that is does add on some uniqueness to facing that stress. And so there's a lot of different aspects that can bring stress. We already talked about team. I don't think we're going to go over that again, but every article I looked up, team is pretty high on the list of things that can bring stress on the mission field. And so go back and listen to our episodes on the team. Learn to be a good team leader if you're a team leader. Learn to be a good team member if you're a team member. But there's some other areas that in life, just living on the mission field in general. We were just talking about this before we started this podcast. It seems like nothing on the mission field ever works when you need it to work, right, Erik?
And yes, in fact, usually the two times they seem to always break is when you're either getting ready to leave to go on furlough or just coming home from furlough. And so you need to realize, and sometimes a week will start and the washing machine will go out and then the hot water heater, and you just say to yourself, I better clear my schedule a little bit. This looks like the week where everything's going to break. And there's an old adage that famous people die in threes. You see one famous person die, then another. It's almost like that on the mission field. One with appliances, they all die in threes, and so you need to be just be ready for one of those trying weeks, because maybe, I don't know how it is for everybody, but maybe you listen to this and you live in North America, and although maybe fewer people now call repairmen, but it's just not the same. In fact, last week, one of the reasons we couldn't have this podcast is we had a plumbing issue at my house. Well, I have one of the greatest plumbers in the world, but for whatever reason, he forgot his cell phone that day. And so with this emergency, I had to get another plumber. And let's just say, without going into a lot of details, he wasn't nearly the same quality plumber. And it was a very stressful, hard day because he kept leaving to go get parts and then would come back not with the parts. And we say, why didn't you get the parts? And he'd say, well, you didn't give me the money. I'm like, I just gave you money. What are you talking about? And so, but you're really at the behest of this person. You can't make them too mad or they're just going to leave. And so that can be very high stress and really puts on everything on your life on hold. You need these things to work. And so today, for instance, we're getting ready for a big ladies tea. Holly's been working weeks on this. She's very excited about it. And we started having another problem with plumbing. And I explained to her, we got to get this resolved because we don't have the time today on this. And, these are little tiny things, but they all can add up to big things if we don't handle them correctly.
That's true. We live here in the desert. And so when it's rainy season for about 2 months of the year, the sand doesn't absorb the water quickly. And so there are a lot of the streets will flood, and they don't really take care of the septic or drainage system. Most of the streets don't even have drainage system, mostly because it's only 2 months out of the year. Why repair it for just 2 months? This and that. And so a lot of our streets will flood. Where we live, the way the houses are constructed, I mean, unless you've spent a ton of money to really make it airtight, you're always going to find a leak somewhere. There's a new place where, water is going to enter in. So our first house we lived in, every rainy season, there'd be a new leak in the wall, a new leak in the roof, and we would have the landlord fix it. And then the next year there'd be a new spot on the wall and a new leak. And it's, as soon as it starts raining, And usually here, for some reason, it starts raining in the middle of the night. And it doesn't just sprinkle here. When it rains, it downpours. It's torrential rainfall. And it's going to be major thunder, lightning, torrential rainfall, and it just hits hard. And it's generally right before you fall asleep, it hits. And the water starts flooding into the house. You have to get up, get towels, start, scooping it out. And I remember finally I told our landlord at our first house, look, you just got to repair this. It's, I'm up all night during the rainy season trying to get this water out. Can you just redo the roof? He said, all right. So we moved everything out of the house. We built a little shed, put everything in there. And then we moved over here to our center. We had one room. So we're living in one room, all of our kids and my wife and I. We have one bathroom up in the apartment here in this center. So we're living here for a few months while he's repairing the roof. I go over there one day and the mason said, here, I got to show you something. We go up on the roof and there's a huge hole in the middle of where our bedroom was. And he said, you see that? I said, yeah, it's all, knock it in. He said, yeah, there's something missing. I said, what? He said, it's the rebar for the cross beam in your room. It's gone. He said, it's just disintegrated. And he said, I took two taps with the hedge hammer and this whole thing just collapsed. And I thought, man, we're sleeping under this whole time, Oh,
so then, my word.
Well, then finally we end up moving here. We're living in this house and we did the best we could. It's pretty well airtight, but there's some of the windows will leak and things like that. Well, then one night during rainy season, it starts downpouring. And everything's doing pretty good. I've got the windows finally pretty well sealed. Nothing's really coming in, but then we hear a bunch of water downstairs. And what had happened was the drainage system for one side of our house, it clogged up. And the way our house is designed, actually right here behind me, it's our laundry room and everything, but it has an opening that to the ceiling. And I have a drainage system there, but it got clogged. And so all the water from the roof on half of the roof comes down that side of the house and we hear water. And so my wife goes down. I had threw my back out, so I can't even walk. I come hobbling down. My wife opens up the security door to look outside that door. And she said it was about 3 feet of water just come pouring into the whole downstairs. And of course, it's just a mess, water everywhere. I can't move, so I can't help her at all. The kids jump into work. So the kids are down there. They're pushing it out the door the best they could. And so it's times like that, Eric, that you can either get really frustrated and stressed out, or you can decide, you know what, we're just going to laugh about it. We're going to have as fun as we can. Here I am with my back out. I can't even move. I'm laughing, of course. I'm having a great time. But Julie, she's like, what? She starts laughing about it. And I think that's important for your kids too, to make sure that they see that, yes, it's stressful. There's a lot of difficulties living on the mission field, but they especially need to see you laughing about those crazy times.
One of the things that we can dive into this right now is, really when those situations happen. Now, Josh spoke last week or a couple weeks ago on a very emotional, specific situation about handling how other people handle death and things like that. So that is one level of stress. But as Josh is mentioning, I would say a vast majority of the stress we go through are not necessarily involved with people, but with things breaking. Some of it's culture. It may be people, actually. It all depends. But it's a real hodgepodge. But when it's things like Josh is mentioning, like, a flooding situation, and I'm sure people who are listening who live in North America have experienced things like that before, your car breaks or whatever the situation may be. How you handle that stress is very important. Obviously, if it's an emergency, sometimes you have to just react. You have to take someone to the hospital or you have to change a tire or whatever the situation is. But oftentimes, there are times where we can react properly and improperly. And I was thinking about that today as we were preparing for this topic. And when I come across very trying, stressful times, I have found, doesn't mean I always do this, and I try to remember, one of the things I've found is that if I can get alone in prayer for a minute, or sometimes even before I pray, just to get silence, to cut off, voices and noises, and sometimes just take a short walk and catch my breath and think about the situation, and then ask the Lord for direction. I found that often is something that can really help a situation. Because I'm just like anybody else. If I can put gasoline on the fire and it can get, to be a bigger fire very quickly. But I found that if you can step back from a situation, cut off all the voices, and then get alone with God, very quickly the level of pressure can come down some, so you can start making wise and decisions and being discerning. Another thing that I found that really helps when I'm going through a super stressful time, and it's funny that I often sometimes forget this, but I try to come back to it, is being around godly music. Godly music will soothe your soul, and having whether it just be instrumental many times, or ones that would have words that would bring alleviation to your soul. It really is important. These are not small things that you're going through, and you really need the Lord to speak to you. And often it can be through, obviously, time with him and words of encouragement through his words. We already talked about laughter, and that's good too. But when the stress is high, when you have just gone through what Josh is talking about in this basement downstairs, and you've got it resolved, and you're sitting there going, what am I doing? Often I found turning on some music and getting alone with the Lord can really, really just kind of pick you up. Have you ever experienced that, Josh?
I'm exactly what you said about the music. Now, about the prayer, you're absolutely 100% right. We'll go through things where we'll just stop. If as a family, we get like our stress levels up and everybody's kind of agitated at each other and everybody's starting to get a little upset at each other, and
Your
voices,
family does that?
oh yeah, voices are raising and attitudes are flaring up, then sometimes we'll just say, all right, we're going to stop right now and we're going to pray about it. Let's just pray. All right, Lord, and then we'll bring up whatever it is that we're trying to figure out and just ask God for wisdom and calmness and grace to see it through. And that's what's great about Jesus, about Christianity, about prayer, is that we have access to the throne of grace at any moment. And I remember, boy, your kids are going to see that. They're going to learn that. I remember one time we had a major prayer request answered. I remember our son, Tristan, he was only about 7. And he looked at me and said, Dad, God really answers the prayers of missionaries, doesn't he? I said, he sure does. Otherwise, we can't do this at all if he didn't answer prayers. And so, yeah, that's so important. And then music, I went through a stretch where I think it was when we moved to the house here and I didn't have any speakers set up. I didn't have anything really set up, that we weren't regularly listening to good, godly Christian music. And over time, I'm like, man, just something just feels like I'm missing something, that it's just, there's something missing, I couldn't even describe it until I really sat down and thought about it and really began figuring out what is it, and realized, man, if we just add some good godly music. So I got some speakers set up and we try to have it playing in the background as much as we can when we can. And but you're right about that. That's something that I neglect sometimes, is to just have good godly music playing in the background. Another stressor for me that I thought it would be a good relief at first, kind of, because for me, an outlet for my stress is to sit down and read a book or exercise. Or one thing I thought, well, maybe I'll go on. I had downloaded Twitter and started reading through Twitter, and I thought, I like reading news and stuff. Well, then I'm looking at my my iPhone and it tells you how much time you spend on different things, and I was spending like an hour a day or more on Twitter. And I thought, what am I doing? Like, and I'm not feeling any better for it. So I thought, all right, I deleted Twitter. I don't really use it that much anymore because that wasn't a good outlet. So you need to make sure you evaluate, not only are you implementing prayer into the stress that you're going through, and that you're making sure that there's good godly music that you're listening to, incorporating into your daily routine, but then whatever you are doing for stress relief, make sure you're evaluating it, that it's actually relieving stress, that it's actually a good outlet, and as well, that it's not taking up more time than what is necessary. Because one thing I found, especially when you're working alone, Eric, is that you can get absorbed with something you enjoy And then you're not really focusing on the main thing. Because again, you're on the mission field alone. Nobody's really checking up on you on your daily routine. And so you need to be disciplined to where you know yourself and know whatever outlet you choose for that, it's not taking over everything else. Would you agree, Eric?
Absolutely. In fact, I had that note down as I was thinking about the music and thinking about the prayer. I know in my own life, because of my background and I'm not nearly as interested in politics as I used to be. In fact, it's much smaller than it ever used to be. But I do like to be informed, and so I do, cursory take a look at Twitter and things like that, the news, and find out what's going on. I like to be informed, but there are seasons of life where I've noticed that I am so connected to the world, and it's really affecting me, and I didn't even understand that or realize that, and so the more we can turn off the world, and the older I get, the more I realize the world's going to be just fine without me. I need to turn them off and turn on God more. And it sounds very spiritual, but it really is. It's a really kind of a salve to the soul. The more you can get away from just the worldly philosophies and focus on the Lord, read His Word, listen to good messages, whatever. I love listening to messages in Spanish. That's one of the things I enjoy is listening to preacher friends of mine. And listen to good music, listen to maybe uplifting podcasts like the Missionary Perspective podcast that would just encourage your soul all the time. And but just kind of turn off the rigors of the world. A lot of times, especially if you're into politics, and I found out specifically in the last 5 years, missionaries have become very political for various reasons we don't have to get into. And it's almost like they became lobbyists more than they became missionaries. And it's like, man, I understand we probably agree on 98% of these things, but man, what's going on in your ministry? I want to be encouraged. Like I mentioned the other day, my friend who comes up with that one line or he shares it where it says, what are you carrying? What are you celebrating? I want to hear about those things. I want to carry people's burdens that are spiritual, and I want to celebrate with you. Leave the politics to the politicians. Be a good citizen. Vote. Be informed. But let's encourage people to turn towards Jesus, and let's turn the world off a little bit more.
Yeah, I totally agree with you that, especially during COVID when everybody was locked down, I spent a lot of time, I read a lot, I was, and there was a lot of politics in the whole COVID issue. And so, it can become kind of, it gets overwhelming. And you do need to be able to step back and say, hey, if this isn't my domain, and if this isn't my calling, if this is just a hobby, then maybe I need to step back and take a break from it, and not be so engulfed with it, because, you're serving in another field. And especially if you're a first generation missionary, you do want to keep some sort of a connection to your home culture. And it's a lot easier to do now because of social media. And so there's a danger there that you create this online world where you're almost living in the States because you're so consumed by it. And so, I would say just give a warning on that. I like what Eric said, just step back out of that. Be careful of letting the world influence you, and even American Christianity, and I speak in generalities of American Christianity. It's become so politicized, and even just some of the way people approach things. You can, as a missionary, maybe you've learned to see things a little differently because of just your perspective of living on a foreign field, working with other believers that are not American Christians. And sometimes you can look at the way a lot of American Christians can be closed-minded. It's just kind of like it's America is the world, that you can get so engulfed with thinking that you got to show everybody, all the American Christians, that there's more out there. Well, that's not your job. You're called to reach the people that you're working with. And so, make sure it doesn't become overwhelming, that it doesn't consume you, that your outlet for your stress doesn't become something that consumes you and distracts from your actual ministry. One of the stresses I found was the transition back to the States. So to me, there's two stresses: transition back to the States, which you're going through right now. Share a little bit about that. Share a little bit about kind of what's it like? What are you experiencing right now? This whole transition of getting back to the States, you're closing up, things are breaking, you're trying to get things all set. How do you just bear that stress, or what's that experience like?
Well, one thing I can say, now we're in 13 plus years and we've come home many times. It is different than it used to be. It is far less stressful, mostly because we have this church really has a lot of servants in it. And so, we're not nearly having to do what we did in the past, which was basically, plan out every service and have, you're going to do this, you're going to do this. I mean, people pretty much, serve in their capacities, show up. There's a few plan Bs and plan Cs that have to be made in place, and papers that need to be written, and pastors who come and preach. But as far as preparing like your home, it's not the same as what Josh is going through, which is 6 months or a year. But there are a lot of things that have to be thought through, and it usually takes a number of months ahead of time to make sure that you've paid this bill, or you've had this thought out, and this person's going to be in charge of this vehicle. And it really, as it starts adding up, especially for my wife, she's the one that really starts working on lists, because we take advantage of being home to get all our school books ordered. So because to ship them here on the mission field costs 4 times as much. So they have to be sitting there waiting. Well, that takes a lot of time. There's clothes, taking assessment of the clothes you have and the clothes you need to buy when you're home. And so there are all kinds of stresses. Recently, we've gone through a lot of people either getting really sick, and recently we had a former member who's now a member at another church that we've started on the other side of town, who passed away. And we had to help take care of his wife, his widow. And that weighs heavily on me as a pastor. We have a number of older people in our church, and I praise the Lord that in my absences so far, that no one very key and integral in our church has passed away. But I always kind of have that fear. And so, there's just all kinds of stresses that come, even if I'm only leaving for 2 months, to know that, this is the life you've been given by the Lord, which is wonderful. You get to see people saved and discipled, and then people behind you in the States are supporting you, and you go back and report to them. But it is this funny kind of in-between life that you live when you're going home on furlough, where you're not really home for good, and you're not really gone for good, and you're kind of living in this limbo land, and it brings up a lot of stresses. It also allows us to do a lot of fun things. We've talked about that on furlough, but the stress levels, boy, things start to break right about the time you're leaving, and you got to be ready, preparing your heart for that. And that's part of missionary life. We talked about it in the furlough podcast.
Yeah, that's right. So I'll say this, being a Westerner, whether you're from America, whether you're from Canada, you're going to have more of an analytical mind. You're going to be more goal oriented. You're going to be generally somebody who is going to be driven, self-disciplined. There's a lot of characteristics that go into shaping who you are, your personality, how you grew up. If you serve in another country, especially somewhere like Dominican Republic, or somewhere like Senegal, or somewhere in Africa, or a third world country, or a developing country, people think differently. People approach life differently. People are far more laid back. People are not as goal oriented as they are relationship oriented. People are going to be, one of the frustrations is, if a car breaks down, they'll just leave it in the middle of the road and just fix it right in the middle of the road. It's just like, can't you make the simple step? But again, we're more analytical. We try to problem solve every issue that comes up. Whereas it seems like in third world countries, people are more, I don't know what the word would be, but maybe more practical with what the resources they have. And so why waste time moving it off to the side of the road?
More in the here and now as well.
Yeah, you live in the here and now, and yet there's no time, right? There's no concept of like the here and now.
This is what I'm doing.
Exactly. They don't measure a day by hours and minutes. They measure it by just, relationships and people I engaged with. And they don't, most people in community living in this type of a culture over here, at least, it can be a source of frustration for a missionary that doesn't learn to be flexible with that type of mindset and thinking. And I've said it on a podcast before, and I'll repeat it again. You cannot look at their way of doing things as being inferior to your ways of doing things. You have to be able to say, hey, they have a reason why they do things. This is a poor country, and the people living here have learned how to maximize the use of every resource they have, no matter how limited it is. And that carries over into every aspect of their life. And so that can be stressful to us. In a lot of little, it can be a lot of little details like that can be stressful on our end, but it's just the way of life. And so I want to make this point, and there's all kinds of examples I could give, but the main point is when you're working with the people in your culture and the little things rub you wrong, no matter how stressed out you get about disagreeing with the way they do things, maybe you think you have a better way of doing things, you cannot in your mind or in the way you live begin to demean the people that you work with.
Right.
Do not demean and belittle the culture that you are in and the people that you are working with. The Bible says, remove not the ancient landmark, right? There's a reason that it's there. There's a reason why people do things the way they do things in the culture that you live in. And there's a reason why they're so relaxed and you're stressed out all the time. Maybe you can learn something from the way that people approach life in the culture that they're living in. And that's something I've tried to apply, is just observe how people live here, how they live in community, and try to embrace those things that I feel are counterintuitive to my personality or my way of living. And even just the way I analyze and the way I think we need to get projects done and get this and that done, learn to incorporate some of the way of the culture in which you're living so that you can lower that stress level. You don't have to lower your expectations, but learn to create expectations that meet the culture and the worldview of the people that you are living in. Yeah, that's what I would add.
So, Josh, this funny thing, we're talking about not demeaning the culture that you're in, and it brought to mind something very, I think, kind of funny, something I have to deal with in our church. There are a number of people in our church who spend quite a bit of time in the United States. And one gentleman in particular, who is one of our bus drivers, he spent so much time, he was a taxi driver. He spent so much time in America that he's become very American when it comes to his punctuality. Okay, now, if you're familiar with the Caribbean and island time, that is not one of their strong suits, we might say. In fact, I feel like in many ways we've adopted that in our lives as well. We have to work on that when we come home to the States, is to realize we're not on island time, we're on American time, which means you have to be early. And because of this, it causes a lot of conflict sometimes in our church, because he'll tell people to be ready at, let's say, 5:30. Well, he's there at 5:15 honking his horn, and they don't get it. They don't like it. It often causes a big wedge. And I try to explain to them, saying this is why he's doing this. And then I have to explain to him, this is. And so it's so funny for me as being this American trying to explain to these two different Dominicans why one is treating the other. It really has a lot to do with their own culture and how to deal with different kinds of stresses. But I think that's funny. And I think it's true when you say that you can't demean another culture, because that's how the culture is. There are things in a culture you can speak against if it's against God's word, but if it's just a way they do things. And by the way, for instance, in our church, the sign says we're supposed to start church at 10 o'clock. I can promise you we never start at 10 o'clock. Okay. But with that said, if we started church at 10:15 in the 13 years I've been preaching, and I've always decided this: if we're going to start late, then I'm going to preach the message I have. We're going to go through the songs I have. And not one person in 13 years has ever come to me and said, Pastor, that service is too long. You got to cut it shorter, and I realized culturally, let's start when we have the majority of our people, and we're going to preach and we're going to teach. Now, I know there's a lot of Americans probably listening to this and they have a big trouble with that. And maybe you can get away with that in the mission field and you can start at 10 o'clock and it works. That's great. But what we're talking about is accepting the culture for the good and the bad and learning how to live in it as stress-free as possible. And before you respond, I want to say this too about stress. Maybe it needs to be said, is that expect it. It's normal. It's going to happen. Don't be like, I'm always under so much stress. You're going to be under stress. Like, learning how to deal with that stress is really the key. Like, it's normal, it's expected, and how we react to it is really what's going to determine how well we can have a blessed life on the mission field.
Yeah, you're right. With the time thing there, we never start on time as well. Church starts at 10 here. We usually get rolling around 10:30 by the time we get started with Sunday school, and we'll go till about 1:30. It just depends, But what's funny is the only time I've ever had somebody say something to me about going too long was twice in Canada. And it's usually right when I get back from the mission field and I'm still in African time. And I'm just, and a lot of times too, when you're a missionary, you've got so much information. You can go to a church, and unless you've really sat down and condensed what you're going to say, you can give it, you can overload with your supporting churches. So make sure you're very deliberate. Right now, I'm helping Erik edit his missionary video, and man, it's great. It's very concise. You're saying what needs to be said. Probably would take me 10 minutes to say it, and you have it in a minute, And so you can learn some great tips from Erik here on how to condense it down and boil it down and just get the main points out there. Now, I'll say for stress, for my final point, if you're a missionary listening, maybe write down your own list and send it to me. But my top 3 areas of stress on the mission field for me personally would be, and it's in no particular order, but the top 3, I would say, stress points is driving here, medical issues, and security. And so those are 3 things that are going to be a constant pressure point and a stress point, making sure you're secure, making sure that you have to make that a priority. Your medical issues, you got to make sure you know where the right clinic is to go to and where you're going to go to. And you have to have every contingency planned out. Otherwise, the stress will just get overwhelming. We live in a country where they're not going to treat you at the hospital until you find the pharmacy that's open at midnight to buy the medicine, and then you take it to the hospital, and then they'll do whatever procedure. So I tell our kids, whatever happens, either, we're going to go the 4-hour trip to the better clinic that's in the capital. But if you're in an emergency, if there's nothing you can do, yeah, it can be stressful. I was with a member of our church here, and his wife went into labor at about middle of the night. And it was a stressful situation because not only was it middle of the night, but the baby was premature. But the hospital's like, we don't have anything you need. You need to find the Pharmacie du Gard, which is the all-night pharmacy. It shifts every night. So he had to drive all around town. We're trying to find this pharmacy. And I'll tell you, it's stressful. When your wife is there almost giving birth, you can't find the right pharmacy that's open to buy the material. So anyways, yeah, those are things that I would say missionary, be prepared for. If you're first year on the mission field, then start learning how to deal with those issues. Learn where the right clinics are. Learn from the other missionaries how you're going to deal with medical issues. Learn what's the safest neighborhood. Make sure your wife feels secure. Okay. She does not need that stress every day. She's going to feel it more than you will probably. And so make sure your wife and your family feel safe and secure where you're ministering. It doesn't, you've got to budget it. Whatever the budget is, you spend the budget in order to make sure your family feels safe and secure. Because that insecurity, not feeling safe and secure, that's going to shorten your time frame that you're on the mission field, because it wears on you over time. And then just relax when you're driving. Okay. Just it's all right. Just go with the flow. Okay. So that's all I would say. Erik, you want to close out?
Yeah, it's an amazing list. So we've talked about it in different podcasts, but I reiterate with Josh, those are 3 areas I think it's probably pretty universal in most cases for missionaries: driving, medicine, and security. One last thing. One thing I think can help with our stress level is sometimes we can be thinking that our stress is some of the largest stress in the world. And it is stressful. Whatever you're carrying, it is stressful, no doubt about that. But one of the things I found that helps maybe put into perspective better the stresses that we face the day in, day out is to read missionary biographies. And when you read basically what many generations before us went through and how they handled it, and how it was normal for them, you're able to go back and say, yeah, I think I'll take my stresses. I'll figure this out. I'll figure out how to deal with broken washing machines and no power and flooded basements than, living in the jungles with parasites and cannibals. You realize, man, okay. So everything is kind of about, the position I'm in now and the perspective I have now. And so that will help. Also, this happened this week with me. I had a phone call with a dear friend not too far away from us who's another missionary. And we were bearing each other's burdens, mostly listening to his, and really made me think, wow, hearing other people's struggles really does help you realize it not only is it universal, but it's also, you realize some people are going through quite a bit more than you are at the time. And now, there are times when you're going through maybe something nobody else is going through. I understand that. But I think when you share other people's burdens, you realize we're all struggling in some way, in some form. We all need to lean on the Lord. We all need his grace. And I think there's some way you're cathartic in that and sharing that, and helps you say, all right, listen to some good music. I can go on tomorrow. The Lord's going to see me through, and you can deal with the next level of stress, knowing that other people are going through the exact same thing.
Well, those are great points. And there are several ways you can deal with stress, and just learn what works to relieve that pressure, to kind of as an outlet for stress relief. Like Erik mentioned already, make sure you have a prayer life and make it real, and just learn to relax a little bit. Keep that intensity, that passion for souls, that passion for the work of the Lord, but relax a little. Laugh about life, and laugh about your situations, and laugh about all of the difficulties and things breaking down and just the way things are. Learn to have fun with it, laugh about it, and don't be so spiritual that you're always doom and gloom all the time. And so I really think this was a great couple episodes on stress. There's so much more that can be said. We'll save it for another podcast in the future. Erik, you're getting ready to head back to the States. Hope you have a great time while you're there, visiting family, updating churches. I'm looking forward to a couple of interviews that you have planned. I know for myself, we have a missionary from Burkina Faso. He's coming to visit us next week. I'm going to sit down and interview him. And we're going to try to get a little bit more of a variety, interview a few other missionaries and some pastors.
More
and
perspectives.
That's right. More missionary perspective. And so, boy, we appreciate our audience. Your liking and sharing and subscribing. It helps, every bit of it. Every time you leave a comment, that helps the algorithm boost it out there further. If you leave a review, that'll just help the algorithm know that, it's being listened to. And so whether it's YouTube, Facebook, or your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a like, a review, and a comment, and let us know. What do you want to hear about? What do you want to, what topic or theme would you like us to speak about? Well, this is Josh Mead, relaxing, stress-free over here in Senegal, West Africa, signing off. Erik
in the Dominican Republic, enjoying some Pringles, saying, chill out, everybody.
Great. God bless.